I'm Thomas Mann, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution.
And I'm Norm Ornstein, a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, and we are co-authors of the New York Times best-selling book, It's Even Worse Than It Looks: How the American Constitutional System Collided with the New Politics of Extremism. I would say we're both hopeful in some ways. It is an inflection point. It would be a very interesting challenge. Let's say the Senate is 50-50, and we get this radical reconciliation bill. You're going to find 3 or 4 Republican senators who would be appalled by it. Whether any of them would be willing to accept the incredible not only pressure, but threats that would come if they stood in the way after they'd finally attained that power would be interesting. But it's possible, at least, that 1 or 2 of them would. At the same time, if President Obama wins re-election and Republicans realize they've got 4 more years with him, you're going to have a number of Republican senators who are tired of voting no on everything, and you'll probably find coalitions in the Senate. That I would describe as hopeful, but also, to be realistic, we have 2 examples this last couple of months where we had 3/4 of the Senate come together in a broad bipartisan way on the transportation bill, a badly needed crumbling infrastructure, on a farm bill in the midst of this horrific drought, and with a broken farm subsidy system. And both bills went to the House, and the transportation bill sat there through a critical construction season, and while huge problems ensued, with the House not paying any attention to what their Republican counterparts did in the Senate. And we have seen nothing done on the farm bill, even as livestock farmers are being devastated by this. So I'm not terribly hopeful in the short run about the House. We are hopeful over a longer period of time. The examples that Tom cited, period around the War of 1812, the Civil War, the 1890s, those were cycles that took about a decade or so to get out of. The last one was a Democratic Party that veered off the rails. So I think we come back eventually. What makes me very uneasy is a decade now is a very long time given the immediate challenges facing the country in a tough economic and political world.
The question is whether the new status quo on January 1 of 2013, with the so-called fiscal cliff, the expiration of the tax cuts and the sequestration of defense and discretionary domestic spending, changes the political dynamic. Let's say if Obama's elected but Republicans still control the House, it turns out just stopping something isn't satisfactory anymore because taxes will be higher than they are now by quite a large amount. So Republicans will need affirmative steps to cut taxes, but without the agreement of President Obama, they can't get them. So they're forced into a negotiating mode that they haven't been in during this period of time. And that might, with the global pressures in the global economy and the new status quo from which they're operating, that could create some beginnings of negotiations with some Republicans in both the Senate and the House whose instinct is more toward problem solving than ideology advancing. So that's possible, but it's just as possible that if Romney's elected with a Republican Congress, we could get a dramatic change in policy and then a stunning reversal in the next midterm election or the following presidential election, so that there's a new status quo, but a political majority that's deeply opposed to it, and continue on with the kind of battles that ensue. That's why two of our chapters are in the book are really devoted to looking over the long run of trying to see if it isn't possible to temper the extreme partisanship and polarization of the parties through extensions of the franchise. And we toy with ideas like mandatory attendance at the polls, but we also look at other reforms of the voting administration, but also the electoral system. There are things that can be done to change the nature of those who participate, say, in primary elections, and where you can build in a kind of form of preferential voting, so you don't have third parties either discouraged or put in a position of influencing the outcome of an election that denies the majority the choice they would like. So I think it's important to work on both fronts. The immediate situation, trying to clarify what's going on here and why we have the dysfunction. In the end, you've got to reach voters, but sadly, the voters you need to reach are those who are not already committed to the parties, and those swing voters are the least engaged, least informed, least looking for such information. But I have to say, we come down pretty hard, not just on the partisan media, but on the mainstream media. They have cowered in the face of charges of partisan bias or ideological bias, and they've come to take the safe route, saying, oh, they're equally implicated, or give a voice to one on the left and one on the right, and step back from really getting at the truth. This is so evident now in this Congress, in particular, where there was a lot of reluctance to speak forthrightly about the reckless move it was to take the debt ceiling hostage. And we're seeing it in the campaign as well. And we see it in the commercial channels. We see it in public broadcasting. Everyone's sort of kind of wary of being charged with bias. That's why we were quite explicit about our analysis, and that's perhaps helped us get the attention that we've been able to get. If you read that carefully, we offer that as a solution, but one that we're not very attracted to. That is to say, we're not ready to undermine separation of powers. We're not attracted to the idea of weakening the Congress. We're not excited about the prospect of removing important decisions from elected officials, but we do think some degree of some distance on some matters, like the base closing commission. In this case, probably the most important is the new board set up to try to control healthcare costs. It's weak the way it was set up because of opposition, but it needs to be strengthened. We have to introduce some elements of those without denying the ultimate authority of Congress and the president to act on the basis of their election legitimacy.
Exactly so. We don't want a parliamentary system, but we suggest that we may have to tilt a little bit, if we can't break the deadlock where we are now, towards providing a little bit more authority for the executive. We explore other options, but our strong preference is to keep the institutions the way the framers designed them and simply have them work with political figures who understand that the goal is to work with others, find some common ground, and solve problems.